Imagine transforming your one-season summer garden into 3, where it produces fresh, homegrown vegetables across the spring, summer, and the fall, even in challenging climates. Today I'm showing you a year-long view of my kitchen garden and the lessons I learned along the way with both the things that worked and the things that didn't. It all started 11 months ago. After I situated the birdies raised beds, I chose the small, medium, and the tall round for this space. I filled them with organic matter and compost. Then I connected my Garden in Minutes garden grids to be able to put the irrigation on autopilot. But the fun began when I started planting and continued growing for 3 seasons: spring, summer, and fall crops. In this bed, I first planted broccoli, cabbage, and onions in the spring. This was late February because we were a little warmer than usual. Early March is pretty typical for this, about a month before our average last frost date. These all grew really well, and as I harvested them, I planted okra, watermelon, and poblano peppers. The okra and the peppers did fine, but the watermelon did not do so well. I believe it was a bit too crowded with the okra, and it didn't get enough sun. And the melons that did form weren't good quality, and we ended up having a rabbit or squirrel or something that decided to take it. But it was all right. I had a whole other watermelon harvest in my big garden. But the okra and the peppers grew until fall, and I replaced those with this fall lettuce. And I actually forgot to cover it in the 10.5 inches of snow. And I think it's actually still survived. This red one may be gone, but the winter density is looking really good. So maybe I'll still get some lettuce out of that even though I forgot to cover. Now this bed right here was my biggest success, at least for the spring and the fall. I planted 2 rings of carrots in early March, and then in late April I planted 3 bell peppers in the center of the bed. They grew together until I began harvesting the carrots in May and continued harvesting into early June. As the carrots came out, I replaced them with sweet potatoes, and the sweet potatoes grew until their harvest in October. After that, I attempted to plant spinach seedlings in their place to grow under the shade of the bell peppers, but with the heat and the lack of rain, and maybe mine not being so diligent at watering this bed, and the fact that spinach doesn't like to be transplanted anyway, they ended up all wilting, bolting, and dying. So you can see what's left here, not a whole lot. So my last crop in this bed was peppers until we got a freeze in November. Now this bed over here was an experiment. I decided instead of filling this bed with soil, I ended up making it a straw bale garden within the raised bed. Now I didn't just put straw in here by itself. I used the straw bale gardening method, which I have lots of YouTube videos about. We'll put all of that in the description. But I started this out with straw, and the plants that I first planted, squash and flowers, they did great. But as they always do, they got hit with a squash vine borer, so I took them out and I planted some more flowers for the summer. Then heading into fall, I topped off the bed with compost since the straw bales had sunk, and I planted carrot seeds. Strangely, none of those carrots ended up germinating, which was an epic fail. I explained more about my guesses as to why those failed in my podcast, the Beginner's Garden Podcast, episode number 394. 3 big garden failures. But it was just one of those things that I had to accept and move on from. I was not very happy that I didn't get any fall carrots. That was really sad, but it happens. We all have garden failures from time to time. Moving on to this 4x5 raised bed back here, I started the season off with celery, planting it a few weeks before our last frost date. Once the warm weather arrived, I added tomatoes, jalapeno peppers, and eggplant. Oddly enough, the eggplant did not do so well here, and I suspect that it got too shaded from the tomatoes and the peppers beside it. Lots of lessons learned every season, right? But the celery, peppers, and the tomatoes, the pineapple, and the Park's Whopper did great. Because our first freeze came late, I ended up keeping the tomatoes in this bed until then, and I didn't plant any fall crops here. But I definitely could have, because I for sure had the space. Now in this 3x4 raised bed, I planted potatoes, and they gave a fantastic harvest that I was very pleased with. After the potatoes came out, I planted paprika peppers because I love growing spices in my garden, and I also added an everleaf basil plant, which also went in a couple other beds as well. I also tried to plant carrots in the fall, but they, like the others, didn't sprout. But because I had the extra space, I planted some short day onions here, which they are still under snow as well. So we will see how that goes. I'm definitely taking a chance on them surviving in our zone 8A winter, but time will tell if they do. If they do, it'll be a huge win. Finally, the 4x5 bed back here was similar to the others. I started with celery and I added tomatoes and different peppers, specifically shishito and banana, along with some flowers. Then in August, I added broccoli to grow under the tomatoes, which I still have one little plant left. For the most part, it's already been harvested. But I added the broccoli underneath the tomatoes that I had trimmed. The broccoli had plenty of sun and produced a fantastic harvest, though I realized I pushed the intensive planting a bit too far by planting them at every square in the Garden in Minutes garden grids. The heads in this bed didn't grow as large as broccoli that I had planted in the big bed behind me that had a lot more space. Next time I'll return to every other square when I'm planting broccoli in the Garden in Minutes garden grids. Looking at how I planted and grew in this garden for 3 seasons, was everything perfect? Definitely not, but I learned a lot like I do every year, and I'm more than excited to start creating the layouts for this space in 3 seasons for this year. You see, the thing that I am most passionate about teaching gardeners, especially beginners, is that you can get way more harvest out of your space if you embrace 3-season gardens like this. Even if your climate isn't like mine in Arkansas, and we typically don't have the snow, this was just a pleasant surprise, you can stretch your growing season further than you think you can. Although the exact timing may not be the same as mine, the rhythm will likely be similar. One thing I noticed is that some of the crops I planted directly from seed in the garden, and some of them I transplanted out. All of the transplants I had started indoors. If you're a beginner and you're not sure exactly which crops are best planted directly in the garden and which should be started indoors, either by you or you get the transplant at the garden center, now through February 3rd, you can get my popular Before You Sow mini course for free. This is a $39 value, and it has helped so many beginners get questions answered, many they didn't even know to ask. I want you to get started out right, so go to journeywithjill.net/beforeyousow. We'll also provide that link in the description, and use the code FREE25 to get access for free through February 3rd, 2025. Want to see more about my kitchen garden design and planting? Check out the kitchen garden playlist here.